Hi, it's Dougie Wood, and in this video I'm going to explain to you two ways to use SharePoint with Power Apps. We're going to first take a look at how we build out some SharePoint lists, and then how do we customize them using Power Apps. We can also then take a look at how do we create Canvas Power Apps directly from our SharePoint list data. So let's take a look. The first thing to understand is, what is a SharePoint list? A list is a collection of data that you can share with your team members and people around your organization. You can find a number of ready-to-use list templates to provide a good starting point for organizing your lists. And you can find that by going into office.com and then going into the Lists app. Now, you can create SharePoint lists directly on a SharePoint site, which I'm going to show you in a moment, but you can also create them via this List app. So List is basically a nice way Microsoft have wrapped up the ability to create these lists through its own interface. So you can see here there's templates for things like issue tracking, recruitment tracking, content scheduling, and you can kind of take a little look at what these would look like inside of the actual list. So if you were to create this using this list template, once you populate the data, this is what it would look like. So you can see a list is very much like a sort of like a mini database or like a spreadsheet or something like that, where we've got columns and we've got rows of data which live within a table structure. So how to create a SharePoint list. So as I say, there's two different ways you could do this. You could do it from the list interface, or you could actually go directly to the SharePoint site. So I'll quickly show you both options. From office.com, we could search for the app called Lists, and we can go into Lists, and we can create a new list, and we can either create from a template, we could create it based on an existing list, we could upload an Excel sheet or a CSV as well, but you could start that off, or we can just click on blank list. So I'm going to call this my test list. I can give a description of what I'm going to use it for, color code it, even give it an icon. Then I'm going to choose where I'm saving this. Now, by default, it'll say my list, which is like your own personal area. Or I could choose to create it on a specific site. So I could choose to create it on operations or finance. So I'll create this on finance for now, and then click on create. And that's going to create me my SharePoint list. Before I go into creating some of the kind of other features of a SharePoint list, I'm going to show you the other way that we can create a SharePoint list. So I'm actually going to create an instant reporting list. So I'm going to do this on my operations site. Now I could have done this by going through the lists and then selecting, instead of finance, selecting operations, and it would have created my list on this site for me as well. Or I can go to my operations SharePoint site and I could do it through this front end way. So I could click on the cog, then I can click on site contents. And then on across the top, I've got the ability to create a new list. Now this, you'll see, is exactly the same interface it's going to give me then. I can choose to create a blank list or from a template or loaded Excel spreadsheet or CSV. So I'm going to click on blank list, and this is going to be my incident, if I could spell, incident reporting. So the description might be something like, oh, it's for storing data related to incident reports that are being submitted. I can also choose whether I want this list to show up inside of my SharePoint site navigation bar, which I'm going to say yes, just to make it a bit easier for me to access later on. So I can click on create. So that's then created me my list. So that brings me on to the next question, which is, what are list columns in SharePoint? List columns are essentially the columns of data that we see in our list. And we can add new columns by clicking on add column, and it will show us the different types of columns we could add into our list. So think of this as almost like the columns in a spreadsheet, what's going to appear, and then the data is going to then appear in rows between those columns. So we can add in different types of columns, and depending on what it is we're looking to do, we could include text, choice fields, date and time of something, yes or no fields to say, was it this or that, yes or no, a person, so we could say who's the owner, who's accountable, or something like that. But there's all sorts of different columns that you could use. Now I'm going to create an instant reporting, so I'm going to create a couple of different sort of option columns in here. It's just a high level example. It's not going to be a real kind of production system. It's just going to give you a real kind of example of what these columns would potentially be. So it might be that, for example, I'm going to choose a multiple lines of text option because I want it to be a bigger kind of paragraph of text to record incident, sort of a description of the incident or actually that's a bit long-winded. We'll call it incident description. And now we can make this column required if we wanted to make sure that people are submitting it. We could make it rich text if we wanted to, but I'm just going to keep it nice and simple and just call it incident description. And there we go, we've got our first column. I'm also going to create another choice field, and I'm going to call this maybe, let's say, body part injured, or injured body part. And then this might be choices, head, shoulders, knees, and you guessed it, toes. Couldn't resist. So again, I could sort of default some options on here, or I could choose to have multiple selections if I thought actually there could be multiple injuries taking place. And again, I could make this a required column if I wanted to. So there we go. So we've got some basic kind of information together now for our reporting. Now, of course, we could add in multiple different columns in here. It might be the date and time of incident that took place. It might be who's reporting it, because you might be, or who was injured. It might be a person field, for example, because it might not be the person reporting it, actually it was the person who was injured. So you might want to choose to actually say it's a people field that we're going to select in here. So once we've got our columns in here, and as I say, we can add in, within reason, as many kind of columns as we like. It's then worth getting some data into this so you can actually see what it's looking like. So I usually use the editing grid view to speed this process up. So the title of it might be whatever the incident was. So fall downstairs, for example. I fell down a flight of stairs because a box was left at the top, for example. Injured body part, let's say a shoulders. Who was injured? I'm going to say it was me. Let's add a couple more. So it might be that there was, I don't know, a slip in the kitchen. Water was left on the floor and was not mopped up. Injured body part, let's say, was toes. Again, I'm just going to use myself an example in here. And then a final one, let's say, burned on the kettle, faulty kettle, and the handle fell off. Injured body part. Well, I haven't got a hand on here, but let's just say it was knees on this one. And again, I'm going to put myself in here. Now, there's all sorts of kind of automations that you could potentially build off the back of this as well that I'm not going to be talking about today, but it might be worth considering when you're creating the columns in your table. Say, for example, if you were going to use Power Automate to automate something, let's say, for example, you wanted an escalation. So let's say, for example, as part of the incident, was an ambulance called, or was the police involved or something like that. If it sounded something that was more serious, you could use a yes/no column to say was police involved? Yes. And then you could use Power Automate and say, well, if that column is equal to yes, then send an email notification to the head of operations or something like that, for example. So there's different kind of things you could use this data for. So it's worth considering how you're having this data stored to then best use later on for automations or even reporting as well. So rather than, say, for example, having a free text box to allow to say what body part was injured, that would be a bit of a nightmare when it comes to reporting with things like Power BI or something like that, because you might have different responses that's put into there, whereas having a uniform set of choices means it'll make it much easier for reporting later on. So now we've got our data in here. I can click on Exit Grid View, and there we go, we've got our data. Now, the reason why I suggest putting some dummy data into this to start off with is it makes it much easier when it comes to formatting later on down the line, because you can actually see where the data is going to sit, especially when we're looking at Canvas Power Apps. So let's look at the first option that we can use Power Apps for with SharePoint. So this is how to customize a SharePoint list with Power Apps. So what we're referring to here is that we've created our SharePoint list now, and by default, what we'll have is the ability to click on New in here and see a standard issue SharePoint form, and it's very basic about what we can kind of do with this. Now we can sort of jazz this up a little bit and make it maybe branded. Maybe we can use some additional kind of features of Power Apps, so adding in flow buttons and things like that we could do. So we could customize this to our heart's content using Power Apps. It's really simple to do. All we need to do is click on this drop down here and then click on customize with Power Apps. Now what this will do is it will then spin up the Power Apps customization studio, and it will put the form into a new kind of position where I can start editing it using the equivalent of Canvas Power Apps. It's exactly the same as what we'll see as the editing system later on with building out a Canvas Power App. It's exactly the same user interface to interact with this SharePoint form using Power Apps. So here we go, it's now finally loaded, and we can see this is what it looks like inside of our Power App. Now, you can see it looks slightly different to the original SharePoint form, and this is where we can start customizing things. So I'm not going to go into the full details. This is not a Power Apps tutorial necessarily of how to use Power Apps, but I'm just showing you how you can customize your SharePoint form with it. So let's say, for example, we wanted to add in a bit of branding across the top. Let's insert some imagery and some different kind of layouts. So I'm going to insert a rectangle into this and put it up here. Let's put this bar like this, and maybe let's just make the color of this sort of a lightish grey color. And then I'm going to insert a logo into here by clicking on image. Whoops. There we go. And put this up here. And then I can insert an image, so I can click on add an image. I'm going to select my image logo here. So I'm just using Microsoft 365 logo, like so. And then I'm going to insert a bit of text to line up with this. And then I'm going to put a little bit of text into here. So I can just type in, say for example, report and incident. And then I might make this text just a little bit bigger. Maybe a bit bigger again. There we go. So we've got our report on incident now app name, we've got our logo in there, a little bit of branding, and I'm good to go. So now what I'm going to do is save and publish. So I'm just going to click on the save button across the top to save this, and then I'm going to click on publish, which is then going to say, are you sure? I'm going to say yes, publish this to SharePoint. Now this is going to publish the customizations I've made to this form directly to my SharePoint site. As I say, I've not gone too nuts with this. It's not a Power Apps tutorial. I'm just showing you how you can customize the form, so a little bit of branding, but we could go and we could add in maybe some other kind of features of Power Apps. Maybe we could put a roll-up gallery of other items into this if there was it was related to other kind of data. There's so much you could do with this to customize the form. But once it's published, I can then go back out of here, go back to my SharePoint list, and then when I click on new, it might just take a second actually, just quick refresh. Now I can see it's now a totally different form. It's now loading the Power Apps form, and now this is my Power Apps form that's pulled through. So you can see now I've got the report incident, title, description, all that kind of same information, same form, but it's now styled up with my logo, my Microsoft 365 logo, and it's got a title across the top of the form. So that is how to customize a SharePoint list form using Power Apps. The second part of this then is actually how to create a Canvas Power App directly from SharePoint. So let's take a look at this using our same data in our SharePoint list. So back in our SharePoint list then, and this is the bit which requires a little bit of data inside of a list, will make this a lot easier. But from our list, you can see we've got this integrate button. So when I click on integrate, I've then got Power Apps, and I can say create an app. So what this is then going to do is it's going to create me a standalone Canvas Power App, which is much easier to access on mobile phones and tablets and other kind of devices. And I'm going to show you as well how we can embed this directly into a SharePoint page as well. So rather than having to come into a SharePoint list interface, we can actually either access it from a mobile phone or even embed it into a separate SharePoint page completely. Now it's asking me to create an app and give it a name. So I'm going to call this my incident report, and then click on create. This is then going to create me my Canvas Power App. Now, again, it's going to give me the same Power Apps, customization studio, and all the same kind of features of what I was looking at just before, and it's nice and easy to use. It may just take a couple of minutes just to spin up the Canvas app, because what it's doing is it's setting up based on a default template that I'm going to explain to you once it's finished creating. There we go, it's now finished creating. So you can see it's created this with a default template. So it's got a browse screen, it's got a details screen, and it's got an edit screen. So the browse screen essentially is just a gallery which is showing all the items without any form of real kind of ordering or sorting or filtering or anything like that from our SharePoint list. And then we've also got the detail screen. So when you select an item, this is a detail screen. And when you click on this pencil, it's then going to take you to the edit screen for the item. So you can actually edit it there as well. So again, this is not an over kind of Power Apps kind of tutorial. It's more about showing you how it integrates with SharePoint. But again, it's to go back to why it's so important to have some data in here, we can see that this is pulled through the title and the display name, as well as the kind of description of the issue. But we could actually choose actually, if we wanted to change some of this information if we wanted to. I mean, it's quite good, to be fair, but it might be that we wanted to change this to actually this item, and then let's have when it was created, so when it was actually reported to us. So we could have the created date then displayed directly in here. So this is where we can sort of change this information. We can change, as I say, the colors, the logos, and things like that of instant reporting. So let's say, for example, I'm going to make this text a little bit smaller, or let's change the background color. In fact, let's change that to maybe more like that gray color, and let's make this text just a little bit smaller. Too small, something like that. Let's move it along. In fact, let's just change it to instant report, and again, I'm going to put in my logo, or I say my logo, I'm claiming it, Microsoft 365 logo. I think it looks really cool, so I'm using it in everything at the moment. So I'm going to click on this, click on media, click on image, and again, just need to size this into the relevant area, drag and drop it into here, click on to add an image, going to select the logo, there we go, and now we've got our logo in here. I might just move that just a little bit that way. Maybe make this just a little bit, give it a little bit more room. Like so, there we go, that looks a bit better. Cool. So now these icons is gonna mess with my OCD, this having these kind of levels. There we go. That looks much better. So now we've got our app ready to go. Again, all we need to do is click on save and publish this app. Again, it's not a Power Apps tutorial. There's loads more that you could do with this. Do you know what I mean? You could apply different filterings and buttons and things like that. Maybe have like a RAG status of things if they look more urgent than others and things like that. But essentially, that's our app created. So if I click on the play button, I can simulate it directly in here. I can see all the items we've got. We can create a new item. So we can get a title. So it might be, say, fell off a ladder. Description, ladder was broken. Injured body part, let's say shoulder. Who was injured? I'm going to specify it was me. Any attachment, so this might be, if it was on a mobile phone as well, this attachment could actually be a photo as well. So you could actually use this to take pictures directly from the mobile phone into your app as well. And there we go, we've then got an item created inside of our app. We could also go in and we could edit them directly from in here, which uses this form, or we could actually choose to delete them as well. So we could delete the records from here. So you can actually do everything you need to do to create and update and delete records, all the CRUD kind of functions directly from your Canvas Power App. So now that we've got our Canvas Power App created, there's one final thing that I want to show you, and that's how do you add a Power App to a SharePoint page. So now we've actually looked at the two different types of ways that we can use Power Apps with SharePoint, but the final thing I want to do is show you how we embed that Canvas app we've just created into SharePoint. So let's go back to the home page of our operations site where we created this instant reporting. Let's embed that Canvas app we've just created now directly into our SharePoint site. So all we need to do is click on that edit button across the top, and then scrolling down, I've left a little area of my SharePoint homepage here that I want to embed my Canvas app. So I'm going to click on to add a web part into this section, and then I'm going to search for Power Apps, select Microsoft Power Apps, and then I need to get the app web link or the ID of the Power App. Now, the easiest way to do this actually is if you go to Power Apps. So if I go to office.com, and then I'm going to go to search for Power Apps. I'm then going to click on to find my app I just created. So I'm going to click on Apps on the left-hand side, and then it'll show me the recent apps. Click on the three dots, and then click on Details, and then that will show you either the web link or the app ID. I'm just going to select the app ID, and then I'm going to go back into my SharePoint page, paste in here the app ID. I can also choose if I wanted to show a border or not. It'll put a little border around it. I don't think you particularly need one, to be honest. And then there we go. Click on Republish to publish the page. And now I've got my nice Canvas app loading directly onto my SharePoint page. And again, I can choose to add new instance directly through this. I could view instance directly through it. I could edit and delete them all through the Canvas app directly embedded into my SharePoint site. So that's how you actually add Power Apps into SharePoint. I hope you enjoyed that video to demonstrate two ways to use SharePoint with Power Apps. So we had the original way with creating a list and customizing it with Power Apps, and then we had a way of creating a Canvas app directly from our SharePoint list. If you enjoyed the video, please do like the video. Subscribe to the channel for future tips, and if you've got any thoughts, comments or questions, use the comments feed below to let me know. Thank you very much, and keep an eye out for future videos.